Hello students, welcome back to Deevige English grammar classes. In our previous classes, we have already learnt what a sentence is, how to divide the given sentence into subject and predicate, how to identify the sentence if it is in the active voice or if it is in the passive voice, and how to transform sentences from the active voice into the passive voice, from the passive voice into the active voice. And we also discussed how we can still have sentences in the passive voice without the use of by. So all that said and done, we now move on to yet another important topic of English grammar, and that is question tags. In fact, question tags are very simple, students. You needn't have to worry and break your head as to how you're going to supply question tags to the given statements. Now, one more point that I would like to highlight here is there's a lot of difference between an interrogative sentence and a question tag. Now, the similarity between the two is even if it's an interrogative sentence, it is going to end with a question mark. A question tag also has to end with a question mark. So, the common factor between a question tag and an interrogative sentence is both of them end with a question mark. Now, there is one point of difference between an interrogative sentence and a question tag. An interrogative sentence would be a sentence which is asking you a question. So, when a question is asked, obviously the speaker who is asking that question expects a reply from you. So, an answer is required. Now, in a question tag, the difference is statements are given to us, and based on the statements that are given, you supply the question tag. I repeat, in an interrogative sentence, the sentence asks you a question and you need to give an answer to the question asked. Whereas, in a question tag, a statement is provided and you give the question tag based on what the statement is. Fine. Now, before we move on to how we are going to supply question tags, there are certain few rules that you need to remember. If you remember those rules, you will never go wrong in supplying question tags. Now, in your English question paper, be it your second language English or the first language English, these questions are just asked for 1 mark. But yet, you cannot ignore that 1 mark. Every mark counts in your board examination because it not only helps to get more marks in that particular subject, but it also increases your overall percentage. So do not ignore questions which are just 1 mark because they help to increase your percentage. Well, now the statement that is given to us, the very first question that we have to discuss. Geeta didn't tell the reason for her sadness. Now all of us know what a sentence is. We have already discussed that many times before. Geeta didn't tell the reason for her sadness. Now, this is a statement. I told you it is not an interrogative sentence. It is a statement. For this particular statement, you are supplying the question tag. Now, over here, Geeta didn't tell the reason for her sadness. See the verb didn't. Now, if the statement that is there in the question that is given to you, that time you need to see whether the sentence that is given is in the positive or in the negative. Now, how do you identify whether the given sentence is positive or negative? If the word not exists in the sentence, then you can be sure that it is a negative sentence. If the word not doesn't appear in the sentence, then the whole sentence that is given to us is positive. Now, why did I make that statement is, one of the rules of supplying question tags is, if the statement is in the positive, the question tag should be in the negative. If the statement given to us is in the negative, the question tag has to be in the positive. It is like saying, like poles repel and unlike poles attract. So if one is positive, the other has to be negative. Both cannot be positive, both cannot be negative. That is, the statement also cannot be positive, the question tag also cannot be positive, or the statement cannot be negative and the question tag also cannot be negative. If one is positive, the other has to be negative. This is the very first rule that you need to remember when you are supplying question tags to the given statements. So let's discuss the rules of the rules that we have to bear in mind while supplying question tags. Rules to be borne in mind while supplying question tags. The first rule is, if the sentence is in the positive, the question tag will be in the negative and vice versa. So, if the sentence is in the positive, comma, the question tag should be in the negative. And vice versa. What does that vice versa mean? It is V-E-R-S-A. So what does vice versa mean? It means if the sentence is in the negative, the question tag will be in the positive. So if this is not very clear, I'll write this word once again, students. V-E-R-S-A. So it is vice versa. So that's the first rule that you need to bear in mind while you are supplying the question tags to the given sentence. So what is the sentence that is given to us? Geeta didn't tell the reason for her sadness. So there is the word not. Actually it is N''T. This is the short form of, so didn't is the short form of did not. And again, with regard to the pronunciation of the word D-I-D-N''T, please students, it is not didn't. Many students pronounce D-I-D-N''T as didn't and not as didn't. Didn't is a different word altogether. We do have a word called didn't in the English language. Not that it does not exist, but that is not the right pronunciation of the word D-I-D-N''T. It is to be pronounced as didn't and not as didn't. Okay, now moving back to the rules that we have to keep in mind while supplying the question tags. What is the first rule that we discussed? Have you all made a note of it? Do you have your pen and paper with you, students? Please make a note of all the rules that we discussed today regarding supplying the question tags to the given statements. So, rule number 1, if the sentence is in the positive, the question tag should be in the negative, and if the sentence is in the negative, the question tag will be in the positive. Now, how do you identify whether the sentence is in the positive or negative? I told you, if the word not appears in the sentence, then the sentence is in the negative. So, you have to supply the question tag in its positive form. Geeta didn't tell the reason for her sadness, did she? Comma here, which is missing, did she? And I told you earlier, both an interrogative sentence and the question tag must end with a question mark. So, Geeta didn't tell the reason for her sadness. The appropriate question tag that you need to use here is did she? That is all. So, the second rule that you have to bear in mind is the question tags will consist of only 2 words. It should consist of only 2 words. Now, why do I say that it should consist of only 2 words? The reason is, if it has more than 2 words, then it may not be a question tag, it may become an interrogative sentence. That's the reason why you need to have only 2 words if you want to consider that as a question tag. If you have 3 or more than 3 words, then it is not going to be a question tag. It is going to be an interrogative sentence which is asking you an answer. Let's move on to the next sentence. Sheila has come home. I repeat, Sheila has come home. Now, Sheila has come home is in the positive. You agree with me? Why do I say it is positive? Because there is no word called not or never or none. These words, not, none, never, all these words indicate negative meaning. So when the sentence is Sheila has come home, what does it mean? That since there is no negative word, the entire sentence is in the positive. So when you supply the question tag, it should be in the negative. So please remember that if the sentence is positive, the question tag will be in the negative. Now we have already discussed two rules. If you remember, the first rule is if the sentence is in the positive, then the question tag has to be in the negative, vice versa. Second rule I said is the question tag should consist of only two words. Now why did I say it should consist of only two words? The reason is if you have more than two words, it won't become a question tag. It will transform itself into an interrogative sentence, and that is not what you are asked to do. You are asked to supply a question tag to the statement and not to change the statement into the interrogative sentence. Now Sheila has come home. So which is the auxiliary verb here? Auxiliary verb is has. So you need to make use of the same auxiliary verb. Okay. So but it should be in the negative. If has is positive, hasn't would be negative. So what is going to be your answer for this particular statement? What is going to be the question tag? Hasn't she? And please remember to put the question mark. Sheila has come home. The question tag is hasn't she? Why did I say hasn't she? Because has is the auxiliary verb. The same auxiliary verb you need to use in its negative form. And when you are using the auxiliary verbs in their negative forms, please also remember to make use of the short forms, because if you do not make use of the short forms, then you're going to have three words and not two words. And you're allowed to make use of only two words when you're supplying the question tag to the given statement. So Sheila has come home. The appropriate question tag would be hasn't she? Now shall we make a note of the third rule then? Yes. The third rule would be the same auxiliary verb to be used. The same auxiliary verb to be used either in its positive form or in the negative form. So the three rules that we have discussed so far is if the sentence is in the positive, the question tag should be in the negative and vice versa. The question tag should consist of only two words, and the third rule is the same auxiliary verb to be used either in its positive or in the negative form. Now we'll move on to the next sentence. Let's move on to the next example, students. The next example that we have here with us is Radha is a good girl. I repeat, Radha is a good girl. Is there any word which indicates negative meaning? Certainly not. There is no word called not, never, etc. That means the statement that is provided to us is in its positive form. So if the statement is positive, the question tag has to be negative. That is rule number 1 that we have discussed about 3 to 4 times. Now, which is the auxiliary verb? You very well know what is an auxiliary verb. So is the auxiliary verb, right? And this is in its positive form. So you need to change is into its respective negative form, right? So what is the negative form of is? It is isn't. Now, when you use the auxiliary verb in its negative form, please use only the short forms. I have already told you some time back. The reason is, if you do not use the short form of the negative word, then instead of having 2 words, you will have 3 words. And when you have 3 words, it is not adhering to the rules of question tag. You are violating or breaking the rule of question tag, because the question tag very clearly states that it consists of only 2 words and it cannot have more than 2 words. So Radha is a good girl. Is the auxiliary verb and it is in its positive form. So the question tag for this particular sentence would be, isn't she? And you need to end it with a question mark, right? So Radha is a good girl. The auxiliary verb is, and it indicates positive meaning. So your question tag should be in its negative form, and therefore is going to be changed to isn't she. Now, if you have noticed in the 3 examples that we have discussed so far, you are not going to make use of the proper noun. You have to use a pronoun. So wherever there is a proper noun, you need to replace that proper noun with the pronoun. Now Radha is a proper noun. Why do I say Radha is a proper noun? Because it's a name of a girl. So since Radha is the name of a girl, you are not going to say isn't Radha. You will have to say isn't she. So the proper noun has to be changed into its pronoun. So since Radha is a girl, you will use the pronoun she. I hope you have understood that. Now let's move on to the next example. Yes, the next example that we have here is Rekha was dancing. I repeat, Rekha was dancing. Now, which is the auxiliary verb? Was is the auxiliary verb. Now, does it indicate positive meaning or negative meaning? Yes, it indicates positive and not negative. So, was is the auxiliary verb and it conveys a positive meaning. So because it is positive, the question tag will have to be negative. Now the same auxiliary verb to be used. Remember, that was a 3rd rule that I mentioned to you. Whatever auxiliary verb is used in the statement, students kindly make use of the same auxiliary verb. If the auxiliary verb is in its positive form, you will use the same auxiliary verb in its negative form. Do not change the auxiliary verb, because if you change the auxiliary verb in the question tag, then the entire question tag is marked wrong and you are not even going to be awarded half a mark. You will lose 1 full mark if you do not make use of the same auxiliary verb either in its positive form or in its negative form. So Rekha was dancing. Was is the auxiliary verb. It indicates a positive meaning. So the question tag has to be negative, and since we are making use of the same auxiliary verb was, you are going to write it as wasn't she. Are you going to write it as wasn't Rekha or wasn't she? You will write it as wasn't she, because you are not going to make use of names of people in the question tag. Wherever you have names of people, if it is a name of a boy, you will write he. If it is a name of a girl, you will write it as she. So since Rekha is the name of a girl, instead of Rekha, you will be writing the pronoun she. So the answer is wasn't she. Right? Shall we move on to the next example, students? Yes, students, let's go back to another example. Now, I just want you to look into the instruction that is given. You just have the letter A, supply a suitable question tag, because there's only one sentence that is given. So this was the instruction given for a whole lot of statements that has appeared in every sheet. So kindly make that change. It is supply a suitable question tag to the given statement. Okay. Now the next sentence that we have here is, Maya doesn't cheat anyone. I repeat, Maya doesn't cheat anyone, right? Now, which is the verb here? You have the verb cheat as well as this, but you are going to take this verb into consideration and not the verb cheat. So, doesn't is the short form of does not. And I told you, whenever you're using the short forms, you need to make use of the contracted form, or you need to make use of the auxiliary verb in its negative form, and that should always be in its short form. So, Maya doesn't cheat anyone. There is the word not. Correct? So, when you have the word not, what does it indicate? It gives a negative meaning. So, your question tag must be in the positive. So, what is the positive form of does not? The positive form of does not is does. So, Maya doesn't cheat anyone, does. Are you going to say does Maya, or are you going to say does she? It is obviously going to be does she, because I told you when you have names of boys or girls, you are not going to make use of the name of the boy or girl. You are just going to make use of the pronoun either she or he. Since Maya is a girl, you are going to make use of the pronoun she and not the proper noun Maya. So the answer is doesn't she, and please end it with a question mark.